Hi everyone, and welcome to this Generation G podcast series. These episodes are both a tool for knowledge sharing and a space for honest conversations. Carried by youth voices, each episode explores what meaningful participation truly looks like in development programs, advocacy spaces, community work, and beyond. Today's episode focuses on a critical and often overlooked theme, the intergenerational dialogue. It's not just about bridging generations. It's about transforming how we share power, make decisions, and work together across different lived experiences. I'm Usama, your host for today, and I'll be guiding us through the conversation. And you will also hear from two powerful voices, Asma and Yusra, who will each explore different facets of what it means to build genuine, just, and transformative intergenerational dynamics. So let's dive right in. So what does it mean to collaborate across generations? For me, intergenerational collaboration means sharing a common responsibility. It's not just about older people passing things down and young people learning. It's about sitting around the same table with clear roles and a real ability to influence what gets done, said, and decided. In reality, that's still rare. Young people are often invited symbolically. We're present, but not truly included. And even when we're listened to, we're not always taken seriously. It's as if we still have to prove ourselves to be considered legitimate. First, we need to acknowledge that we don't all have the same level of power and that it's okay to say that out loud. Then we need to create real mechanisms, spaces for co-creation, participatory budgets, processes where young people actually have weight in decision making. Challenges and learnings from intergenerational collaboration. We've laid the groundwork for what intergenerational collaboration means. But like any transformative process, there are obstacles, moments of stagnation, and sometimes misunderstandings or gaps in perception. Let's unpack that a little bit. Thanks for being here for this second part. Let me start with a direct question. In your experience, what are the most common challenges when it comes to intergenerational collaboration?
In my experience, intergenerational collaboration challenges aren't just about age. Although age really matters, but for me, it's how spaces are built. It's how power is shared and what kind of culture people create together. A few things may make things very tricky. It depends on whether the person is staff or a volunteer or activist or consultant. And it depends on whether the space is old, is new, whether we're working alone or in coalitions. The biggest issues I've seen are gatekeeping, are tokenism, burnout from all sides, and the lack of trust. These problems aren't about individuals being difficult. They're about hierarchical systems, about unclear roles, about decision-making processes. Another big challenge is how generations carry different histories and responsibilities. Older generations may feel cautious, tired, overburdened. Younger generations may feel overworked. And so it all goes back to structures. When spaces are not built intentionally with clear roles, trust, care, we start reducing each other to stereotypes like youth are impatient, like elders won't change. And so it is hard.
So it's a symbolic barrier? Almost cultural?
Absolutely. But it's not just symbolic, it's structural and it's cultural. We built a culture that prioritizes productivity. What productivity means is that if you don't work, you should feel guilty. And our civil society organizations are moving towards the enterprise model. We are adopting a corporate worldview which replicates the corporate logic that we need to have performance over process, we need to have visibility over solidarity, and hierarchy over shared growth. And we shouldn't forget that we are working in human rights before all, in women's rights. We often romanticize what intergenerational collaboration means and reduce it to communication or just respect, which are very important in these dynamics. But the reality is very complex. It's about creating a culture where asking for help is a strength, not a weakness. And so we should not normalize exhaustion. Of course, this isn't limited to established institutions. It's also present in movements. And so we need to make roles clear, have boundaries, and have a shared accountability.
And at the same time, there are often unrealistic expectations placed on young people, like the classic, you are the future, but without actually giving us the mean to act.
Absolutely. Sometimes there are these unrealistic expectations where we look at young people as if they're available and they should be available and full of energy. But we as youth also have that unrealistic expectation that everything will change overnight. So, this is why the intergenerational dialogue really matters. It's about listening to each other, learning from each other, but also unlearning so many things, deconstructing stereotypes about each other.
And when you express that need, it is still often frowned upon.
It really depends on the space, but in many cases, yes, there is still a taboo around expressing needs, especially when it comes to money, when it comes to asking for support. There's also taboo to question what activism is supposed to mean, what engagement is. And sometimes it means self-sacrifice for some people, and asking for compensation can be seen as selfish or like less committed.
And do you think that recognition needs to go both ways?
Absolutely. Recognition must go both ways. Older activists built huge movements through very long-term endurance, often with little visibility or little support. It was absolutely beautiful and it paved the way for transformative change. And younger activists bring creativity, urgency, disruption. Both are necessary to complement each other in such a beautiful way. Some of the most meaningful moments I've had weren't planned meetings or strategic sessions, they were check ins. I think of all the spontaneous conversations I've had with Nizha from ADFM, not to plan or to strategize, but just to process. How does this feel? Are you okay with this? Sometimes it was for feedback, sometimes just to breathe. And what I appreciate is that advice is never given unless asked for it. And that is kind of mutual. This dynamic also applies to our board, our WLP team, the partnership and organization I'm working with. When I expressed interest in attending the CSW, they encouraged me. They even pushed me to go, to speak on panels, to sit at decision shaping tables, many of which were closed doors. So the intention was not symbolic. It was rooted in real trust and recognition. And what makes this work is a shared approach, what we call the HIP methodology, horizontal, inclusive, participatory, that we use also in our capacity building. But after all, we are still learning and working our way to the intergenerational dialogue.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Really. Let's now move on to another essential part. What this collaboration can truly transform in our contexts and communities. Let's welcome our third speaker. Merci pour ces éléments puissants. On va maintenant passer à une troisième perspective, en français cette fois, pour explorer concrètement ce que la collaboration intergénérationnelle peut produire dans les luttes féministes transformatrices. Yousra, à toi la parole.
Merci Oussama pour cette question parce qu'elle nous ramène au cœur de ce qu'on fait, comment on transforme vraiment, réellement, pas en théorie, mais dans nos campagnes, nos collectifs, nos espaces de soins, de lutte et de résistance. Je veux dire d'emblée, l'intergénérationnel, ce n'est pas une option esthétique, c'est un choix politique. Et quand on parle d'approche transformatrice de genre, il faut ajouter féminisme avec un grand S, du pluriel, intersectionnel et anticolonial. Parce qu'on ne construit rien de transformateur si on invisibilise les rapports de domination entre nous et les rapports de pouvoir. Une collaboration intergénérationnelle peut produire énormément, mais pas toute seule. Elle ne se décrète pas. Elle ne se construit, elle ne se construit avec méthode, honnêteté et courage politique. Elle produit d'abord des décentrements. Ce que j'ai vu dans les espaces féministes que je fréquente, notamment au Maroc, c'est que la présence réelle des jeunes militants et militantes, avec leurs codes, leurs colère, leurs références, leurs critiques, vient casser des certitudes. Quand on ouvre vraiment des espaces aux plus jeunes, à celles qui viennent d'ailleurs, aux voix queer, aux voix non francophones ou encore non anglophones, aux survivantes surtout, ça bouge. Mais à condition de ne pas instrumentaliser ces voix, de ne pas les décorer, de ne pas les écouter, de redistribuer le pouvoir. Et ça commence par des choses très concrètes, qui parlent, qui animent les réunions, qui payent, qui détient les financements, qui a le micro dans les conférences, qui définit ce qui est une bonne pratique ou pas, et qui prend les décisions réellement. Elle produit des récits qui sont puissantes. Quand les mémoires se croisent, on ne veut pas d'un féminisme de génération contre génération. C'est pas ce qu'on veut. C'est de croiser les luttes, les récits, les mémoires. Quand une jeune militante queer raconte son combat pour être vue dans sa propre famille, qu'une militante des années 80 lui répond en parlant de ce qu'elle a risqué pour prendre la parole sur les violences conjugales, on tisse, on file, on fabrique un continuum dans la rupture et non dans une simple continuité linéaire. Et c'est ça l'intergénérationnel transformateur, ni fusion, ni domination, mais confrontation fertile. Transmission horizontale, écoute active des fractures. Ce que ça produit, c'est des campagnes politiques où cohabitent plusieurs langages, plusieurs esthétiques, plusieurs priorités, des projets où la mémoire des luttes passées éclaire des audaces de demain et ne les étouffe pas, surtout cela. Elle transforme aussi nos espaces en lieux de justice, pas de juste de gestion. Souvent, les espaces militants ou associatifs sont construits comme des machines à projet. L'intergénérationnel, s'il est pris au sérieux, peut les transformer en lieux de justice vécue. Je te donne un exemple. Au sein de GG, dans une dynamique féministe qu'on a essayé de construire, on avait des tensions fortes entre jeunes militantes de certaines luttes et des figures historiques très institutionnelles. Plutôt que de nier les tensions, on a créé un espace de débat non mix intergénérationnel, multilingue, sans modération verticale. Ce qui s'est passé, ce n'est pas juste un dialogue, c'est une reconnaissance mutuelle des blessures, des violences symboliques, des exclusions, des acquis, mais également des privilèges et un repositionnement collectif. C'est ça du concret, c'est ça transformer. Même si ça reste non palpable pour certains d'entre nous, ça transforme. Alors, comment faire concrètement? 3 leviers à mon niveau. Le premier, c'est de redistribuer les rôles et les pouvoirs. Il ne s'agit pas juste de laisser la place aux jeunes, il s'agit de partager la co-construction, la responsabilité et les moyens. Tu veux de l'intergénérationnel? Commence par renoncer à un certain monopole, laisser coécrire les textes politiques, co-signer les tribunes, ouvrir les budgets surtout. Et puis comme deuxième levier, accepter la conflictualité comme espace d'apprentissage. Quand une jeune militante critique ton approche, ce n'est pas une trahison, c'est peut-être une avancée. Il faut normaliser le désaccord, valoriser la controverse et surtout sortir de la posture de transmission descendante. Puis, comme troisième levier, on crée ça dans une logique de justice sociale, pas de bonne volonté. L'intergénérationnel, ce n'est pas une stratégie de communication, c'est une logique de redistribution, une question de classe, de race, de territoire, de langage, d'intersectionnalité même. Si on ne le pense pas dans une vision anticoloniale, dépatriarcale, antivalidiste, on va juste reproduire les hiérarchies sous un autre nom. Et puis, pour conclure, l'intergénérationnel dans des luttes transformatrices de genre, ce n'est pas un simple supplément d'âme. C'est un outil politique radical pour faire de la place, déplacer les lignes, se laisser transformer. C'est l'espace de nos luttes féministes au pluriel, avec elles qui deviennent plus justes, plus vivantes, plus collectives. Mais pour que ça marche, il faut oser. Oser perdre un peu de contrôle, oser faire confiance à ce qu'on ne comprend pas encore et refuser que l'expérience devienne autorité. Et surtout, ne jamais oublier que ce qu'on fait ensemble aujourd'hui, c'est pas pour nous seuls, c'est pour celles qui viendront après. Et c'est ça le vrai héritage.
Recommendations for authentic and sustainable intergenerational collaboration. Before we close this episode, I want to take a moment to share some concrete recommendations. These come not only from our own lived experiences, but also from the deep collective work carried out within the Gen G program and across the coalitions we've been part of. Because intergenerational collaboration can't remain an abstract principle. It needs to take shape in our practices, in our structures, in the choices we make every day. First, organizations must acknowledge that youth participation cannot be tokenized. Being invited once to speak or to sign off on something already written is not participation. We must shift to our genuine co-creation, where young people are involved from the very beginning, during the design, the planning, the implementation, and evaluation of every project. Second, the participation must be compensated or supported. Volunteering can be part of activism, but it shouldn't be the default expectations for young people. Time, ideas, and skills, especially when asked for in a professional settings, should be recognized and valued accordingly, including financially. Third, we need to invest in time. Real intergenerational collaboration doesn't just happen. It requires space for genuine dialogue, clarity around roles, room for feedback, and sometimes room for slowdowns and restarts. This space must be built intentionally and not rushed. For example, in Morocco, the Media and Culture Associations has developed campaigns that truly embodied this intergenerational spirit, particularly the Manshufoush and the Mudawana Kansana campaigns. Both were grounded in a shared process that brought together young and senior activists around common feminist goals. Across months of preparation, youth and experienced members co-created through storytelling, circles, workshops, co-writing exercises, and horizontal feedback loops. The goal was not only to communicate feminist messages, but to do so in a way that reflected collective authorship and mutual respect, from designing the project to co-producing artistic content and gathering unheard testimonies from across the country. These initiatives move beyond tokenism. They were built on trust, shared ownership, and a plural feminism vision that honored lived experiences. In the Muduwana Kansana, for instance, young contributors played a key role in bringing forward the stories of women often excluded from public discourse. This intergenerational exchange didn't just shape the external messaging, it also transformed internal dynamics. Within the Media and Culture team, it led to moments of genuine dialogue and joint rewriting sessions between generations, reinforcing a culture of listening and co-construction. These campaigns weren't just successful in terms of reach, they became living proof of what authentic intergenerational collaboration can produce. when it's intentional, inclusive, and rooted in real solidarity. Fourth, we need to recognize the diversity of youth. Working with young people means nothing if we are not clear about who is actually present and who isn't. True inclusion means making space for marginalized youth, those from rural areas, from low income backgrounds, those who face discrimination related to identity, ability, or access. Representation should never be performative. It must be real. And fifth, we must create spaces of reciprocity. Knowledge must not flow in one direction. We need frameworks where older generations also listen, unlearn, and adapt. Youth are not just here to receive or inherit, they are here to propose, to disrupt, and transform. These are just some of the building blocks. But they are crucial if we want intergenerational collaboration to be more than a slogan, if we want it to truly reshape our spaces, our ways of working, and the futures we're trying to build. Thank you for listening to this episode until the end. What you've heard is not a universal guide, but an honest conversation, carried by youth voices and grounded in lived experiences. Intergenerational collaboration doesn't happen by chance. It's built. It takes time, clarity, respect, and a willingness to change the rules. If this episode sparked reflections, inspired you to work differently, or made you feel less alone, then we've done our job. And if you're someone, regardless of age, who wants to build bridges rather than walls, you're already part of this movement. This episode is part of a podcast series created by the Youth Board as part of the closing chapter of Generation G. Stay tuned for more conversations on youth-led advocacy, community, transformation, and power. Thanks again, and see you soon.